We'll ask you to stand as we sing 262 in your red hymnal. It's Trusting Jesus, page 262, and sing the first verse and last verse, Trusting Jesus. Simply trusting every day, trusting through a stormy way, even when my faith is small, trusting Jesus, that is all, trusting as the moments fly, trusting as the days go by, trusting Him whate'er befall, trusting Jesus, that is all. Now the last verse. Trusting Him while life shall last, trusting Him till earth be past, till within the jasper wall, trusting Jesus, that is all, trusting as the moments fly, trusting as the days go by, trusting Him whate'er befall, trusting Jesus, that is all. Thank you for your singing. Please be seated.
Studying the Kings, that's what I've been doing. Studying the Kings and really any situation surrounding the Kings. Tonight we'll be in 2 Chronicles 26 as I continue that study. And my hope and goal for the month of April is we've now been giving these monthly slots to different people who are teaching. Now there's no way I'm going to finish completely in the month of April, but what I hope to be able to accomplish, tonight we're looking at King Uzziah, and after him we'll be looking at basically the rest of what happens with the northern kingdom before they go into captivity, and so that's the point that I would like to be able to reach by the time April is done. So 2 Chronicles 26, we'll be looking again, as I said, looking at Uzziah the king here. And maybe you've heard of Uzziah in other places in the Bible, and I will try to catch some of those things as we go through these studies. This, as you might be able to see up there, is part one of what's going to be at least planned as two parts where I look at the life of this particular king. And this king was a king of the southern kingdom, otherwise known as the kingdom of Judah. And I've titled this series of messages, Prosperity to Leprosy. Now, if I say there's two parts and I have two very key words in the title, then which of those two parts do you think we'd be covering tonight? Prosperity. So we're looking, yes, that is prosperity tonight. And so with that, I'm just going to get right into it because I want to be, as I tried to mention on Sunday, a good steward of my time. So I don't want you to miss out on any fellowship or get home too late. We'll do the best we can here. So let's look at the first 5 verses. You're in chapter 26 there. Let's read about this king. Then all the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in the room of his father Amaziah. He built Elath and restored it to Judah after that the king slept with his fathers. 16 years old was Uzziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father Amaziah did. And he sought God in the days of Zechariah, who had understanding in the visions of God, and as long as he sought the Lord, God made him to prosper. Let's first tonight look at his secret to prosperity. And these first 5 verses here really kind of build up to the climax there in verse number 5 regarding what is that secret? I say secret, but I guess it's really no secret. It's clearly on the page here. It says that he sought God, and we'll talk about that when we look at that verse in particular. But going through these first verses here, the first verse talking about the fact that it says all the people of Judah took Uzziah and made him king. That's not a phrase you normally see with the kings. Normally you just see so-and-so began to reign and he was so-and-so years old and all of that. This is a little bit different in how this is phrased here, in that the people actually came and made him king as a replacement to his father Amaziah. And some would say that that's because Amaziah had not made proper preparations for his successor. I don't know that we can definitively say based on what words we have on the page here, but that is something that people have guessed at. So some other things, looking at verse number 2 here, says that he built Eloth. Eloth is a port city kind of along the Red Sea, so maybe think about your geography and where Israel is in comparison to the Red Sea. Maybe you've heard about a very famous thing that happened with the Red Sea at one point in the history of Israel. Like a large group of people that crossed over. You know what I'm talking about? The Red Sea. So we're talking about down there, coming from Egypt. So you have the Red Sea kind of bordering Egypt there. So this port city here of Eloth was in that vicinity, kind of close to there. Something that he had recovered from the Edomites, because the Edomites had taken it over, and this dates all the way back to Solomon's days, and probably one of the largest extents of the size of the kingdom was during the time of Solomon, and expanding even down to that region. So they had that city at that point. The Edomites got it. Now they're getting it back from the Edomites, and I'll give you a spoiler, they're going to lose it again. But anyhow, so they recovered this city, and maybe think about how important that would be. You know, we talk about, it says in verse 4, and I'm getting a little ahead here, but it says he did that which was right. He was considered a good king, and good in maybe some practical ways, you might say. This being a port city, it's going to be very important to their ability to be able to trade for the economy of the southern kingdom. This is huge. And they'll be able to get their wares in and out of that area. And so recovering this city was good for their economy. I know we're talking in our nation right now about rebuilding the economy and other kinds of things along those lines. But anyhow, for them, this was a big deal, I believe. It would give them a good big economic boost to be able to have that as an access point where they can get their wares in and out. So it says there also, looking ahead now, verse 3 talks about, again, he was 16 years old. That's mentioned 2 times here. That would be like, I know Sam's not in the room. I could pick on him, but let's say we made Sam king. What would you think of that? I should talk to his dad first, I guess. I know. Close enough, right? Close enough. 1 year off. But so maybe think of someone that appears that age being the king. We've already talked about Joash, which would be his great-grandfather at this point. And he was 7, 8 years old, 6 years. I need to go back and check. You need to check me on that. He was really young. He was maybe someone more like one of the Larson girls' age. So imagine someone like that being the king. How would you guys like to be the king? Or I guess to be queen for you guys. But anyhow, young. So he was young, but also notice he reigned 52 years. And that's the second longest out of all of the kings, regardless of northern, southern kingdom. A few generations after this, we're going to have Manasseh, and he's going to reign for 55 years. So that's up there in his ability to be able to have a good influence for a long time. You know, we have 4-year cycles here with our main leadership in our country, with our president. And we've grown over having 4 years of a bad ruler. But imagine, you know, and we've talked about this to some extent before, but, you know, someone like Jeroboam, who I last talked about, who was in charge for 41 years. Imagine having a bad king for 41 years. Maybe we can't quite think of what it would be like to be in that situation, but in this case, it's good because he is a good king for 52 years. Now, he wasn't perfect in how he managed his kingdom. In fact, something else I would mention regarding verses 3 and 4 and parallel passages, 2 Kings chapter 15, if you were to look in there, it mentions some of his imperfections about some of what he accomplished or didn't accomplish. And what it mentions there is that he did not tear down the high places. And so there is still, at least among the people, some idol worship. So some of that didn't get cleared out. Whereas other ones, like Hezekiah, who we're going to get to eventually, was able to accomplish that. They did tear down the high places and eradicate that, at least for the time that they were in charge. But in this case, as good as Uzziah is said to be here, he didn't accomplish that. So again, that's in 2 Kings chapter 15. Now, this is the big thing regarding what I wanted to talk about in this first part of this study here, his secret to prosperity. Now, we've kind of hinted at the fact, he was a good king. He accomplished some things, like it says in verse 2, and we'll talk about other specific things that he accomplished. But verse number 5 here, this is the central point of all of, basically really all of what we're going to talk about, and everything kind of stems from here. Look at verse 5 there. It says, "And he sought God in the days of Zechariah, who had understanding in the visions of God." And this is a key phrase at the end of this verse here. As long as he sought the Lord, God made him to prosper. It wasn't just going to happen. He wasn't just going to be prosperous because he's in charge and he's a good person. He had to put some of his own effort into it. But also notice he had some accountability with that too. Now, I don't want to test you too hard here, but there's another king we talked about who had a very similar testimony to this. You wouldn't have to remember who that is. I've actually already mentioned his name, so I'll give you a clue. Who would that be? It starts with a J. Not Jeroboam. Joash. It was Joash. So Joash, back in the days of Jehoiada the priest, Jehoiada the priest was one who guided him and directed him and helped him to stay true. And it said of him during his reign that while Jehoiada was around, then he did that which was right. So there's that accountability, but that also kind of begs the question, what happens when such and such a person is no longer a main influence in your life? Maybe you've had mentors in your life that have helped you along your Christian journey, and maybe they're still with you, maybe they're not. But if they're not there, are you able to conduct yourself in a God-honoring way without that person? That's a good question, and we're not quite going to answer that tonight. That's what the part 2 is for, and the other part of the title. And we'll see what happened with all that. But this is a principle that perhaps you can take to heart, that just like with Uzziah here, as long as he sought the Lord, as long as you seek the Lord, then God will, it said it made him to prosper, and God will give you success in your Christian life if you seek him. A few verses that we can look at in regards to that, and one of them is kind of convenient for me because just a couple weeks ago with the kids upstairs during Sunday mornings with the children's service, I just went over these verses. So Matthew chapter 7, you can hold your place there if you want to turn here. Matthew 7, verses 7 and 8. And these might be very elementary verses to you, but I think they help to shed a little bit of light on what this is going to mean for us as New Testament Christians here. Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, and I'll go ahead and start reading there. It says, "Ask and it shall be given you." What's the next word? Seek. What did Uzziah do? He sought the Lord. "Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened." Now, that is principles regarding prayer, but at the same time, prayer is an aspect of seeking the Lord. If you're praying to him, maybe it's in a very specific way in this context here, because you're praying to him as opposed to maybe seeking God in other ways. You're reading his word, you're trying to get his mind about things. So, and the word seeking here, if you were to look it up and what the original Hebrew word means, it literally means to try and get or reach something someone desires. He had the desire to try and apprehend a closer relationship with the Lord is maybe how I would phrase it here. So Matthew 7 and 8, so that tells us a little bit about seeking. Some other verses we can look at. Another famous king, perhaps the best known king in Israel's history, back before the kingdoms were divided, King David. If you want to look in 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 11, and this is a verse regarding David. And David, of course, was known as a man after God's own heart. And he wrote some very beautiful things about seeking the Lord. In fact, these same words that we're looking at in 1 Chronicles 16 are repeated in Psalm 105. All right, so 1 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse 11, it says there, "Seek the Lord and his strength, seek his face continually." So some good advice there from David. And this is around the time that they were dedicating the ark. They had just recovered the ark. They were bringing it into the tabernacle, and they were putting it back in its proper place. And this is a psalm that David wrote in response to this situation here. Another verse that we can look at going back a little bit further in history, I mentioned that group of people that crossed the Red Sea, led by none other than Moses himself. You can go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Some other words that would be good for us to take to heart. And this was some advice that Moses was giving the generation going into the promised land. And again, good words for us. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 29. Moses there says, "But if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul." Now, something added in that verse that didn't appear as much in the other verses is perhaps this added desire here. If thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul. How badly do you want to seek the Lord? How much effort are you going to put into it? I would gather that from Uzziah's life that he really sought after the Lord sincerely, at least during that time when he had this leadership of Zechariah. And by the way, this Zechariah that's mentioned back in our passage is not the Zechariah who penned the words to the book of Zechariah. That was a post-exilic prophet that happened after the captivity of both the kingdoms. This Zechariah is just this Zechariah who was an advisor to him in a spiritual role, had spiritual understanding. So hopefully those are some words that we can take to heart as we try to adopt this secret into our lives. I say secret, but let's seek the Lord sincerely. Let's give him our all as we do that. And I also think about other kings in the past where this has been said of them, that they devoted their lives in this way. Going back to Jehoshaphat, again, not a perfect king, but again, someone of whom it was said that he sought the Lord. King Asa, and this goes back a while in my studies now, but King Asa, one of the first kings after the divided kingdom in the southern kingdom, he was one who also, it is said there, that he sought the Lord as well. So his secret to prosperity is that he sought the Lord. Let's do the same. Let's see the result of this now as we continue and see his strength in structures, as I've tried to alliterate this here. His strength in structures. Let's read verses 6 through 10 back in our passage. 2 Chronicles 26, starting at verse number 6. It says there, "And he went forth and warred against the Philistines, and brake down the wall of Gath, and the wall of Jabneh, and the wall of Ashdod, and built cities about Ashdod and among the Philistines. And God helped him against the Philistines, and against the Arabians that dwelt in Gur-baal, and the Mehunims. And the Ammonites gave gifts to Uzziah, and his name spread abroad, even to the entering in of Egypt, for he strengthened himself exceedingly. Moreover, Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate, and at the valley gate, and at the turning of the wall, and fortified them. And also he built towers in the desert, and digged many wells, for he had much cattle, both in the low country and in the plains. Husbandmen also, and vine dressers in the mountains, and in Carmel, for he loved husbandry." Let's talk about his strength in structures. We see in verse number 6 that he went back and fought an old enemy of the kingdoms here, even back in the days of Saul and David. The Philistines were forced to be reckoned with, and maybe you remember a famous incident that happened with David regarding a particular Philistine. Places of their region that are mentioned: Gath, one of their strongholds; Ashdod, you might have heard that referred to. I think there's a certain temple there, Temple of Dagon, if I'm remembering correctly. But it says all these places, they broke down the wall, so all their fortifications, they were helped. And I'm borrowing the word from verse 7. God helped him against the Philistines, it says there. So God helped them to be able to accomplish this feat with their military. They broke down these strongholds. Does hearing those words have any New Testament implications for us? Tearing down strongholds, as he's been able to do here. So they were helped in that. And then not only that, but then they built their own cities, their own fortifications around Ashdod, right in their territory. And he's saying, you know what, we're going to be here now. We're the boss. So God helped him against the Philistines. It says there in verse 7. And in fact, very interesting if you like to do word studies. So you see his name Uzziah here. If you were to look in the 2 Kings 15 passage, you see his name rendered a different way, Azariah. And then the name Azariah means, let me get the right one here, the Lord has helped. So again, it's interesting that in verse 7 that specifically is mentioned, and you see that emphasized here also in this passage. God helped him. And I guess fittingly, because that's what his name means. Azariah, one of his given names. His other given name here, as we've looked at here, Uzziah, means the Lord my strength. And this second part of this study that we're looking at, I'm talking about the strength that he was able to muster. And you see that word mentioned here throughout the passage, and we'll see that word again as we go through this. So Uzziah, literally, the Lord is my strength. We see in verse number 8 here, the degree to which they were able to have some success. The Ammonites gave gifts to them. They're showing that they were in subjection to them. They had success against them. They saw what happened to the Philistines and maybe wanted to appease them. But again, showing that, hey, you know what? We don't want to get in your way. We don't want to be your next enemy. So we're going to pay our tribute, and we're gonna play nice with you. So we also see here in verse number 8, and his name spread abroad, even to the entering in of Egypt. All of these feats of his success made him famous. People heard about it. I'll mention this again, but I'll also mention it now. When God does something like that to work in your life, to do great things, again, remember, why is all of this happening? If you go back to verse 5, why is he having this success? It's because he sought the Lord, and now God is helping him to accomplish these things. And now that God is doing all of these great things, and people are hearing about it. Think about the implications for us. When God does something in our life, we're seeking the Lord, and God works, and people hear about what happens. That's an exciting thing to see God get glorified in that kind of a way, God working through us. Hey, look what God did. We're here on a Wednesday night for our prayer time. Think about the testimonies that we could share based on things that God has done or is going to do, prayers that God is going to answer, things that he's going to do in our lives. And we want people to hear about God, and we want God to be glorified. So his name spread abroad, it said. Next thing here, it's talking about building his towers. So that's in verses 9 and 10. We see a couple different areas where he did this. Verse 9 is talking about Jerusalem in particular and specific places there. A lot of these probably used for city defense, for watchmen to look out. One specific thing I want to point out in verse 9 is that at the corner gate, if you look back to Amaziah, I forgot exactly where the verse is, but when Amaziah was beginning to wane in his abilities and things were happening with the kingdom of Joash, the Joash of the northern kingdom, I want to specify that, came and took hostages and did damage to the kingdom. Some of that damage and I think it's chapter 25, verse 23 here. Yep, so it mentions there the corner gate. So what I see here in chapter 26 now is he's able to rebuild some of what was destroyed from before. So he's having success in that, rebuilding their defenses. We're going to see some other things that I might start to geek out over as we get into some of the later verses. But so he's built these towers. Let me talk about the other towers in verse number 10. It says he built towers in the desert and digged many wells. And there's a specific purpose to these ones here that he had. It's mentioned that the purpose is because he had much cattle. Now, these towers he's building here would be used for people taking care of that livestock, people taking care of you see the word husbandry mentioned there, people taking care of his, if I could use the term broadly, agriculture. He had people working in those different means, and so making sure that they were protected, those that were helping with the work of that, and then also digging the wells so that all of his cattle can have water, so that his plants can have water. He kind of seems to me like he was how many of you are like planting gardens? You like doing stuff like that? How many of you have you started already? You're getting ready for the summer? Not quite. Well, anyhow, I digress. Uzziah here apparently was an avid person in that kind of an area. It says he loved husbandry, and the word literally means that he loved the ground. So isn't it a great thing to be able to plant seeds in the ground and to be able to see something come up? Maybe some peppers or some tomatoes, or I don't know. What are some of your favorite things? Corn, other things. Am I naming anything you like here? Yeah. Sorry. Okra. Yeah, okra. I don't hear many people growing okra, but I love fried okra. Anyone else? Cucumbers. Yeah, so all those things. And Uzziah might have grown some of that too. Who knows? Because I've heard Pastor Walker talk about his trip to Israel, and he said they can grow almost anything there except coconuts, right? Yeah, they can grow the trees, they just can't grow the coconuts. So anyhow, these towers were built for the purpose of taking care of all of these things. And even from a military perspective, too, it would be good to protect your food sources. And that's something that's important for any nation, is to be able to take care, to make sure that their food sources, that the enemy can't get in. Like in the days of Gideon, they would do they would grow their crops, and then the enemy would come in and take it. Well, you would have towers here to help perhaps against that kind of a thing. Or the other aspect of it, not just the crops, but the cattle. Thinking about the cattle, you don't want your people that are herding your cattle getting hurt. So they would have these towers as places of safety that you would go to. And there's some verses that we can talk about in regards to the fact that the Lord is our tower. Maybe you're familiar with some of those verses. Let me take you to a couple. Psalm chapter 61, verse 3. Psalm 61, verse 3. And hopefully these are an encouragement to you as we read these. Psalm 61, verse 3. And I'll go ahead and start reading. This is from a Psalm of David, but in verse 3 of Psalm 61, he says, "For thou hast been a shelter for me, and a strong tower from the enemy." So that's a good thought to have as we think about Uzziah building these fortifications. How can I see this as something that I can think about in my own life? Well, the Lord is our shelter that we can go to. He is that tower. Let's go now to Proverbs chapter 18. Proverbs 18, verse number 10. And maybe this is a verse that you've heard people quote before. "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runneth into it and is safe." All God's people said, amen. So some good thoughts to have there regarding our Lord, who is our strong tower that we can go to. So let's make sure that we build that up again in our own lives, to where we have that pattern in our lives, to where we seek that shelter. Now, Uzziah here had to build the towers. We already have our tower for us. We just need to go there. So let's go to our strong tower. So lastly tonight, after strength and structures, let's look at his strength in numbers for a final part of our study tonight. Back in 2 Chronicles 26, we'll start reading at verse number 11. His strength in numbers. It says in verse 11, "Moreover, Uzziah had an host of fighting men that went out to war by bands, according to the number of their account, by the hand of Jael the scribe and Maaseiah the ruler, under the hand of Hananiah, one of the king's captains. The whole number of the chief of the fathers of the mighty men of valor were 2,600, and under their hand was an army, 300,000 and 7,500, that made war with mighty power to help the king against the enemy. And Uzziah prepared for them throughout all the host shields and spears and helmets and habergeons and bows and slings to cast stones. And he made in Jerusalem engines, invented by cunning men, to be on the towers and upon the bulwarks, to shoot arrows and great stones withal. And his name spread far abroad, for he was marvelously helped till he was strong." His strength in numbers. And we see those numbers mentioned here specifically. Looking back at verse 12, there's this hierarchy. Back to verse 11, it talks about these people that are in charge of putting these groups together, more or less by family. It talks there about the fathers of the mighty men in verse 12. There are 2,600 of these leaders. And under their control were these 307,500 soldiers that they had distributed among all these groups. So really, that's a pretty good size army in this time to be able to have if someone's going to come fight against you. I mean, you'd have a chance. So 300,000 is no small group. So those numbers also mentioned here. This is another phrase I want to help to connect to. If you look back at verse 7, it says God helped him. I see this phrase at the end of verse 13 as being a tool that God used to help Uzziah. It says here that all of these army men were to help the king against the enemy. I see the Lord's hand in the appointing of these people to be able to gather this army together, and this was for the purpose of helping the king. Well, I mean, they could say, my men who are in charge of this, they did this, they did a good job putting this together. But who was the one that really helped? It was the Lord, like we see in verse 7 there. The Lord helped, and the Lord helped through helping to prepare this army here. And don't we need help? If we're going to fight the battles that we face in our Christian life, we can't do it alone. We need others to gather together and to help us. We have our own little army here tonight, and everyone who comes here Sundays and all that. We're an army. We sing songs like that, don't we, Brother Tim, about the army of God moving forward to, we're soldiers in the army. All those things. We're fighting together for a common cause for our Savior and King, our great King, even greater than Uzziah here. And how much greater a cause do we have as we seek to see success in that? And again, going back to verse 5, where do we find success? The success is in our own seeking of the Lord. And so let's do our part as part of that army. Some verses to consider as we think about banding together here. The fact that we can't do this alone. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. These are some verses perhaps you've heard before. I'll begin reading in verse number 9, Ecclesiastes chapter 4. "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up." You see that word help there. "Again, if two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him," and maybe you get the sense of there's some kind of an altercation happening here, some kind of a battle, some kind of a fight. "And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him." Yeah, but we're not stopping at two. It says here, "And a threefold cord is not quickly broken." And how many do we have here tonight? I didn't count us, but what would the power of us together be if we all banded together, helped each other, and supported each other as we all tried to walk this Christian life together, let's help each other. Let's be those ones that come around and help us to withstand the enemy as it comes to attack us. Something about verse 15 here, verses 14 and 15, actually, you see him, so he's appointing these people, but he's also providing for their needs too, to make sure that they have everything they need. You can't send a soldier into battle unless you have the proper weapons. Of course, we have our weapons, so we have the armor of God, Ephesians chapter 6. He has all these things that he mentions. Verse 15 here, something specific I wanted to mention, making engines. Now, the engines he's talking about here is not the engine that's in that piece of metal that you drove here. That's not the kind of engine that he's talking about. You probably are aware that the point in history they didn't have that kind of thing. So the engines is talking about some mechanical device that they're constructing here, invented by cunning men. Hey, they innovated. They were maybe if I could put it this way, they were modernizing the fleet. I've become kind of a geek of museum ships over the last couple years. I don't know how many of you like the same as some of you who went to the trip down in Alabama. You got to go to Battleship Cove. You got to see Battleship Alabama and to see all the 16-inch guns and all that kind of stuff that they have on there. Now, ships like that, I follow particularly the YouTube channel and social media of Battleship New Jersey. In fact, they last year they had a big dry docking process where they were kind of touching up the ship and all that. Now, that was a ship that was built back during World War II. But it was a ship like other Iowa-class battleships that they were used off and on all the way up until the early 1990s. Now, if you go into battle with just your 1940s equipment during the 1980s, you're not going to be as effective, if you would be, unless you, as I use the term, you modernize the fleet. You're going to add some of those missile launchers. You're going to add some of those other things like radar and this special ordnance delivery systems, the things that track all that, the propulsion stuff. You need to make sure you keep all that up to date so that you can be effective in the fight. So he was here doing that for them. They were constructing things, looking at verse 15 there, we might consider them to be similar to like ballistas or catapults. They'll be along those lines, and future armies of other countries would use similar types of devices. But back in his day here, this was like the new big thing. This is like bringing out tanks in World War I. Hey, who's ever seen this before? And they were using this to help protect their kingdom. And we need to make sure, as I've said before, we need to be well equipped for the battle that we have ahead of us. And the place that I would like to end at tonight is looking at the end of verse 15. And going back to some themes that I've already talked about. It says that he was marvelously helped. And we know who that help was. We've been talking about him all night, whether directly or indirectly. We also see there, as was mentioned in a previous verse, that his name was spread far abroad. People got to hear about all the great things that God is doing with Uzziah at the helm of the southern kingdom here. And God is getting the glory for this. This prosperity that he experienced here, it doesn't just happen, as I mentioned, but it begins with seeking the Lord and then watching him work in your life. Can we do the same? Can we seek the Lord and then just watch him work in our life to see our own lives prosper and succeed for him?